Hello, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to another discussion of Clenard and Meyer's book, The Sociology of Deviant Behavior. This time I want to talk with you about Chapter 6, Nonviolent Crimes, a topic that is of interest to a lot of people, and I think the material here is very engaging, so I hope you feel the same way. In the introduction, there's some discussion about the internet now being used to commit nonviolent crimes like identity theft and credit card theft. So as technology changes, the types of crime possible change. Early efforts by President Clinton and Attorney General Reno brought federal attention to the seriousness of cybercrimes, which is an increasing focus of law enforcement. Criminals themselves differ. They differ on how they identify with crime and how they identify with other criminals. They differ in the strength of their commitment to crime as a behavior and the extent to which they progress in acquiring ever more sophisticated criminal norms and techniques. This chapter is focused on criminal diversity and discusses criminal behavior systems, such as occasional property offenders, conventional criminals, political offenders, organized crime figures, and professional criminals. Occasional offenders. These are individuals who don't see themselves as criminals. They usually have very little group support, so they're not interacting with other criminals and gaining a sense of belonging from that group. And they're typically opportunistic, meaning that when they see an opportunity, say for example to steal something from an open purse on a bench next to a person, they might suddenly, spontaneously do that. And finally, they try to rationalize their offenses to convince themselves that they haven't committed a criminal act. So let's have a question then. Which of the following would not be an example of crimes committed by occasional property offenders? Hopefully a very easy question for you. Murder, of course, is not a property offense, so that's one thing that should pop really fast for you there. We'll go through some of these other ones now. Occasional property offenders may consist of committing property offenses such as illegal joyriding, check forgery, shoplifting, employee theft, or vandalism. A brief discussion of auto theft. It can involve different rationales, one of which, joyriding, is usually something associated with youth, and it's the idea of having a car for a brief period for fun, driving around. Short-term transportation would be taking a car to maybe get to somewhere in particular, or trying to use it for a couple of days. Longer term might be for a longer period of time, really kind of taking that car for a while. Selling the car itself, or it can be sold for its parts, so that's called chopping. And it can also be stolen for the commission of another crime. So if someone wants to, say, rob a bank, they may steal a car first so that it's harder to find those people. Check forgery. It says in your text that 75% are committed by offenders with no previous pattern involving such behavior. And offenders do not think of themselves as criminals and generally have no contact with other criminals. Shoplifting and employee theft. These are very expensive crimes. They're closely related. Sometimes both are combined into a broader category that's called inventory shrinkage, which means inventory growing smaller. So it could be from people shoplifting or from employees taking things. If you were looking in your text at shoplifting, there's an amazing number that one study showed that around $13 billion was taken in the course of a year. That's billion with a B. And it said there were about 27 million shoplifters in that year. And that was a study in March of 2014 by the National Association for Shoplifting Prevention. It can also denote a business's loss of merchandise from illegal activities, that is shrinkage in those two categories, as well as honest unintentional mistakes, such as bookkeeping errors. So shrinkage is a kind of an umbrella term for even honest losses. Employee theft can involve direct stealing by an employee, but also, your text points out, it can be when an employee uses his or her store discount to have a family member or friend buy something that they would like. So that's not supposed to happen, and you can think of it as a form of theft. Shoplifters, according to your text, fit into one of two categories: youth. The second category, respectable people, would be individuals including middle-class members, typically who don't have any other criminal record or are engaged in any other types of crimes. And one thing that it's noted is unique to shoplifting: the people who steal often have money enough on them to pay for the thing that they have just taken. Vandalism, another type of property offense. A crime typical of juveniles, and they generally target similar properties like schools and their contents. Public properties can include things like parks and their equipment, road signs, fountains, cars, vacant homes, other buildings, and public necessities like toilets, public telephones, which you don't see as many of anymore. And I've written down here an example for you. Alex is upset with his principal for suspending him from school. Therefore, he decides to vandalize the school building and put spray paint on it, breaks windows. Occasional offenders seldom experience severe reaction for their crimes, unless the crime causes serious damage or results in large theft. Punishment for vandals might include cleaning or repairing the damage that they committed, and juveniles who do this may also be candidates for diversion programs or probation. Now let's talk about conventional criminal careers. Conventional criminals are often described as serious criminals, and they've progressed from violence and theft as juveniles into more serious adult criminal behavior. So again, the idea of a progression over time from juvenile acts. It's not uncommon for conventional offenders to begin their criminal life as juveniles in youth gangs and progress to more sophisticated criminal techniques and associations. Conventional criminals experience frequent interaction with police, courts, juvenile authorities, youth detention centers, probation, and prison, so they're well versed in the criminal justice system. Common characteristics among those who commit robbery or burglary are they're often younger, male, black or African American, and unemployed, and that's from a particular study noted in your text. Conventional offenders develop self-conceptions through their interaction with others of similar criminal background. So meeting and associating with other criminals helps lead to the idea of a conventional offender identity. Offenders who are employed, though, find it easier to maintain non-criminal self-concepts. Society's response to conventional criminality has resulted in an increase in penalties and in alternative forms of punishment, in part because of prison overcrowding, things such as boot camps, which we'll discuss in a bit. Also, too, though, an increase in penalties imposes a more severe punishment by keeping those individuals incarcerated. And incarceration is effective for reducing those individuals' chances of committing more crime. So the idea of taking people off the street who might otherwise do those acts again. Another question for you to think about: which of the following are reasons for the overcrowding in prisons today? The answer, all of the above. We'll talk about those in succession now. We like in our society to think about locking them up and throwing away the key. It's very catchy as a phrase, and people seem to forget all the costs that come with that logic. Here are some problems with increasing penalties. One is that overpopulated prison problem. You have too many people in too small a space, and psychological studies indicate that this is not helpful for anyone. Rats who are overcrowded in a space begin attacking each other more frequently, for example. If you have mandatory prison sentences, you have overcrowding because there are more people who are forced to be there. That corresponds with determinate sentencing requirements, where judges are not given any discretion in terms of the sentence, and increased severity for penalties involving popular crime trends. So this could, for example, be a focus on meth use and the popular media, which causes a revision of criminal law and increased penalties, and thus overpopulation. Here's something from your reading. Hopefully you did, and you might remember. What is the percent of all people arrested for felonies eventually ending up in prison? Those numbers are not very big to begin with, and it might surprise you that it's less than 3% of all people who are arrested for felonies, which are considered serious crimes. That's all that ends up in a prison. And by the way, prison and jail are different. Jail is for less serious offenses, and it's usually for a period of less than a year sentence. Prison is for more serious offenses, felonies, and it's more than 1 year. Regarding younger offenders who commit less serious crimes, courts are using more non-traditional forms of punishment to deter future criminal activity. Those can include things like shock incarceration through a boot camp, for example. These are becoming more popular forms of punishment for reforming criminals through structure and self-discipline. The idea being that punishment without any type of rehabilitative effort won't do any good for younger people. Now we move into political crime. You've got two types. One, crimes against the government. The other, crimes by the government. So, crimes against the government include crimes against the state, and this can involve things like protests, expressions of belief contrary to accepted standards, or attempts to alter current social and political structures. Now, I want to make it clear, each of those can also be non-criminal. We take, for example, our right to protest very seriously in the United States. There are, however, limits to what people can do, and that's what each of these is referring to. Crimes against governments include treason, sedition, sabotage, assassination, hijacking, violating draft laws, and illegal civil rights protests. Political offenders perceive themselves as revolutionaries, people who want to change the system, overthrow the system, and they're pursuing ideological goals. They're not involved in personal goals. Crimes by government include things like corruption, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, perjury, and bribery. And political crimes by local and state governments, your text notes, police officers committing acts of misconduct like brutality, illegal use of force, illegal search and seizure, and also violating citizens' civil rights. Society's response varies depending on the number of people who accept the government's authority. For example, some people agree with the bombing of abortion clinics because they think of abortion as murder, so they're ideologically aligned with that perspective. Others, though, disagree with the vigilant acts, and they are disagreeing because they don't view abortion as murder. So the vast majority of people are in the second category, and that is why the response depends on the number of people who accept the government's authority to decide which is criminal. You can discuss organized crime and criminals and criminal syndicates. These are groups that earn their living from criminal activities like controlling prostitution, selling pornography, making loans with usurious terms, running illegal gambling rings, selling illegal narcotics, racketeering, and reselling stolen goods. We'll talk about these now. Organized crime is a series of illegal transactions between multiple offenders, some of whom employ specialized skills. And they do this over a continued period of time for purposes of economic advantage and political power when necessary to gain economic advantage. Organized criminals with this category, most syndicate members are from inner cities and have committed a number of juvenile offenses, so they are preparing for this career, you could argue, through juvenile offenses. Criminal histories are those that reflect these conventional criminal careers. So here are those categories mentioned previously. 7 areas of illicit enterprise activities for crime organizations. First, illegal gambling. The second, racketeering. Number 3, distributing illegal drugs, drug rings. Number 4, usury or loan sharking. That means exorbitantly high rates of interest, illegal rates of interest being asked for a loan. Illicit sex, reselling stolen or hijacked goods, and also the controlling of legitimate businesses can be part of organized crime. If we think about illegal gambling, you think about bookmakers who take bets on sporting events, and also to people who play numbers games. Racketeering is a specific concept in criminology. It involves programs of systematic extortion that demand money from individuals and organizations in forced purchases of services, loans, or just permission to continue controlling their own activities. So this is a systematic extortion, and there are many examples of this. People who in New York City at one point were garbage collectors, and those people were forced to pay to conduct that service. They paid organized crime for the right, quote unquote, to do that on their turf. Illegal drugs. This involves importing and distributing illegal drugs. Usury. This is when lenders offer money at interest rates, as I said before, far above the legal limit to borrowers, and those are people who are in desperate need of cash, but they lack the required collateral and financial reputations to secure money through legitimate means, like bank loans. Illicit sex. This involves crime groups that control prostitutes, operate nude bars, and also may distribute pornographic literature and films. And sex trafficking can also fall into this category of crime. Reselling stolen or hijacked goods is also something organized criminals do. Selling stolen goods or valuables, maybe heisting a truck and then selling whatever happens to be on that truck to other people. A question for you to consider. When criminals gain control through illegal threats and actions, or by investing large sums of money from an illegitimate source, that is known as what? The answer, C, infiltration of legitimate businesses. What is this? That's when criminals gain control through illegal threats and actions, or by investing large sums of money from illegitimate sources. How does society react to organized crime? Although society reacts strongly to it, it also is something that society depends on. There are people around you who want to gamble, who want illicit sex, who want drugs. And so this is a curious paradox, the illegality versus the continued requests or desire for those illegal things. Investigators struggle to obtain proof of criminal organizations' activities, and also they lack resources for nationwide operations. There have been many, many good reports on 60 Minutes about the difficulties that the feds, for example, have in catching mafia members, especially because of the way in which they talk and their caginess to avoid being recorded. Another question for you. What is the type of offenders who develop the most extensive criminal careers and are revered as the highest social status within the criminal community? Perhaps you haven't even had to think about this one. Professionals would be that type of offender. Let's talk about professionals for a bit. Professional offenders develop the most extensive criminal careers, and as it said in the previous slide, revered as the highest social status within the criminal community. And most people, I think, who want to have a career would like to be considered professional. That is an honorary term, even within criminal circles. Professional criminals do not necessarily indicate, or I'm sorry, the idea of a professional criminal does not necessarily indicate someone who commits many crimes or who makes a living from the crimes they commit, however. What are some skills you can think of with professional offenders? Those things are what separate them from other people. Again, in our particular era, the idea of systematically getting a skill set that is specialized is something that you're doing right now as a student, and this is something, again, honored in criminal circles. So there can be specific modes of crime: picking pockets, shoplifting, con games, stealing from hotel rooms, passing forged checks and securities, and counterfeiting. Let's talk about the status of professional offenders. The high status given professional offenders is reflected not only in the attitude of other criminals, it's also through the special treatment that's accorded them by police, court officials, as well as others. In the United States, we have a lot of films which are dedicated to upholding the professional criminal as someone to be admired. And that's something to think about, that specialization in many different fields will grant you a certain amount of status. Professional criminals are a rarity, and therefore they have high status. Professional criminals also work in criminal associations, and they are typically trained. You don't get these skills out of nowhere. They're trained through other people. Professional criminals often will recruit their apprentice and then mentor them into a profession of criminal activity. So this is a skill set that's passed on, possibly from one generation to another and another. Associations provide background in the specialized language of professional crime. And that's also something to consider. Any profession has its own specialized terms and concepts, and it's no different when you think about professional. Professional criminals generally work within loosely organized groups, and as examples, pickpocket groups may exist over a period of time, experiencing turnovers when individuals might be arrested or they want to quit, and that brings new criminals into the organization. Professional criminals and their acts are not as highly publicized as those of organized crime members or conventional criminals. So this is a question of what type of attention do these get related to the size of the problem that they're causing. Also, as mentioned before, professional criminals receive preferential treatment by the police because they're viewed as craftsmen in the same profession. So it's funny to think of this, but the police wouldn't exist without criminals. And criminals also can admire the police. Since they're against each other, they're sort of working to see who might better who, and that can involve friendly rivalries, which is a strange thing to think about, but something I think to consider when you are looking at this topic.